session. We'll take as many questions as possible, but since time is limited, we can only engage on points relevant to the topic. Do note that any abusive comments will not be tolerated. Although Zoom allows for two-way audio and video, all audience members' cameras and mics will be turned off in the interest of privacy and to avoid interruptions. And also do note that the entire session is being recorded and will be available on our Facebook page for you to catch up at your own pace. Yeah. So moving on to the introduction proper, I'll just introduce Mr. Swee Yong first. Mr. Koo is a director at International Property Advisor, a real estate broker and asset management company, which serves the needs of high net worth and institutional investors. Prior to running his own practice, Swee Yong was a director in the Real Estate Center of Expertise at Societe Generale Private Banking, responsible for advising clients on real estate investments. He was also the Director of Marketing and Business Development at Saville Singapore, as well as General Manager at Far East Organizations Indonesia Office. In addition, he was an adjunct faculty at the Singapore Management University and also at the Department of Real Estate in the National University of Singapore, and at the School of Design and Environment in Ngee Ann Polytechnic. Swee Yong's opinion is regularly featured in the Straits Times, Business Times, Shinmin Daily News, Lianhe Zaobao, Channel News Asia, today, and most of the mainstream media outlets. He's an author of 6 books on the property market, including his recent book titled The Future of Real Estate, What's Next After New Tech and COVID-19, published in 2021. Moving on to our next panelist, Ms. Olivia Choong. Ms. Choong is the president and co-founder of Green Drinks Singapore, a registered non-profit society that raises awareness on pertinent local and global environmental issues and facilitates necessary discussions between businesses, government, green businesses, academia, media, and NGOs. In her environmental advocacy work, Olivia was awarded the NEA's Eco-Friend Award in the Non-Governmental Organizations and Grassroots Volunteers category, and Junior Chamber International's 10 Outstanding Young Persons of the World Singapore Merit Award in the category of Moral and/or Environmental Leadership. A gardener, nature lover, and believer of a sustainable society, Olivia hopes to connect people to nature through the Tender Gardener, where she creates blog and video content focused on gardening and self-sufficiency topics. In her leisure time, she likes spending time in her garden, fussing over her plants and pet chickens. Moving on to our third panelist, Mr. Manu Bhaskaran. Mr. Manu is the CEO of a strategic advisory firm and holds other positions in the civil society. At Centennial Asia Advisors, he coordinates the Asian business and provides independent economic research on Asian political and macroeconomic trends for investment institutions, government agencies, multilateral institutions, and companies with interest in Asia. Prior to Centennial, Manu had held senior positions at Societe Generale's Asian Investment Banking Division, where he supervised Asian economic and investment strategy analysis and was a member of the executive committee in charge of Asian equity research. Prior to that, Mr. Manu worked for the Singapore government, supervising a team that prepared strategic, political, and economic assessments of Asia for senior Singapore government officials. I'll pass the time to Nicole.
Thanks so much, Fik, for such a strong opening. Really excited to have all of you here today. So just want to quickly introduce myself. My name is Nicole Seah, and I'm the Youth Wing President and for Workers' Party. So I just want to start off by wishing all of you who have joined us today on Zoom and Facebook a really warm welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for this pre-budget webinar. what we see is that budget 2022 is going to be a milestone budget for all Singaporeans because we are anticipating a GST hike, which will impact all of us greatly. And this will also be a budget that will address how Singapore operates as a COVID-endemic economy. And this budget will also have ramifications for our positioning within the world economy as well. So because of that, there is much to discuss, much to reflect on. And to that, I am very, very grateful for the time, expertise, and openness offered by our esteemed panelists today. Manu, Olivia, and Swee Yong are deeply respected in their respective fields, and they have graciously offered their time this afternoon. And I'd also like to stress, and this is what Fik has also said earlier, that all the panelists are here today in their personal capacities, and they will be sharing the viewpoints that matter the most to them. And we look forward to be inspired and educated by their sharing today. So with that, I would like to open the session and start off by asking the panelists a hard question and a soft question. So the first question would be, what is your wish list for budget 2022? And the second question, which is a softer one, would be, what would you be doing this weekend if you weren't speaking at this webinar? Maybe I can pass the time over to Manu to start the ball rolling.
Sure, Nicole. Thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Fik, for inviting me. Yeah, the hard question, I mean, I'm just a boring economist. So what I would really like to see is just a lot more transparency and clarity in the budget numbers. Current budget numbers, presented in a format that is not exactly the same way that other countries present it. And sometimes it's very hard for an economist to try and disentangle and work out the actual impact the budget has on the economy. So that's a very boring economist perspective. On the soft question, actually, Saturday is my chill out day. I try to just do things on my own, and most importantly, catch up with friends and family.
So thank you very, very much for spending that time that you could be spending with friends and family today with us. I hope we'll be your friends after this webinar.
Definitely. Yeah.
Maybe Swee Yong, do you want to follow up?
Okay. For me, wish list, in fact, I want to add on to Manu's boring economist list. In asking for transparency, I've been scratching my head over what is relevant to real estate, and in Singapore's case, our land value and our land reserves, and if we could have additional transparency and clarity on how reserves are accounted for on the land side value whenever we reclaim, and we have been reclaiming 2 square kilometers of land per year. How do those things get into our books in the reserves? And so, of course, that's related to then how, when land is, for example, sold from SLA to HDB, such that HDB then sells the flats. How do all these accounting, the credits and the debits work? All these transparency would be great. My wish list for this year, given that the whole world is expected to sort of pull out of this pandemic, is that let's take this opportunity to quickly uplift our poorer cousins and our poorer friends and relatives, because if we could give the lowest 30% income households in Singapore a good uplift to their living standards, provide them with stability and jobs as well as education, then I think in the next 10 to 20 years, we would be really having a lead against many of our neighbors. So that's my wish. If I were not at the seminar this afternoon, I'm continually researching what's going to happen to real estate in future, especially now that the future is getting more murky with so many things happening at the same time and technology coming in to disrupt. My previous sessions presenting at WPYW event was live and face-to-face. Today, we are all seated in different parts of Singapore. And so you can already see that what we used to know about Singapore's office space and real estate, and whether foreign talents really need to be based here to contribute to our economy and our labor force, all these things got to be rethought about. So I would, if not at this seminar, I would be researching the future of real estate.
Thank you so much, Swee Yong. Over to Olivia.
Okay, so for me, I would like to see more support for families, especially mothers. And I feel that, well, I mean, COVID has been very trying for everybody. And I feel that also, you know, so for mothers and everything, and parents, they've had to worry about a lot of things. And I feel that there needs to be more incentives for them to have more children, for example, because I think with, you know, rising costs and of course the GST coming up, like there are just a lot of things that people are worried about, and so it needs to be more conducive for people to have children. I know a lot of people around my age and slightly younger who are not keen on having children, so that's a worrying trend, right? So at the same time, I feel that for the green economy, I mean, we just need more work to be done there to transition people to you know, upskilling into green positions. But of course, at the same time, green jobs have to be more clearly defined as well. So those two, you know, they stand out to me, for me.
And what would you usually be doing this weekend?
That well, like Manu, I'll be like chilling out. So Saturdays are my kind of day of rest and relax, and typically just spend alone.
Yeah. This is why I really like having a women's perspective on the panel as well, because for me, I'm expecting my second child, and I completely agree with you on the need for more support for families and mothers. There are a lot of stay-at-home moms out there, homemakers, and I think that sort of unpaid labor, the mental burdens that they take on might not be recognized. And even for working moms, it can, like myself, it can be quite difficult to juggle from time to time. So I think even as we talk about the economy as a whole and in quantifiable terms, we do also need to look at the things that might be a lot less quantifiable, but you know, still very much important as well.
So the discussion on minimum wage would include mothers being paid a minimum wage too?
Do you need to check in with the husbands on that? Okay. Okay, cool. So thanks so much everyone for sharing. And I'm starting to see a couple of similarities, right? That I think amidst all of this, and especially during COVID, we're all cherishing that time that we spend with our friends and families. And I think what we're going to discuss today as well has a lot of impact on, you know, how they're going to be living their lives. And, you know, there's going to be quite a fair bit of change, especially with some of the big announcements that are coming up and that have been discussed quite frequently over the past few days. So I think the first area that we are going to touch on today, and this is probably the hot button topic that a lot of people are here for, would be the GST hike. So I think let's talk about the GST hike right now. And I'll just start the ball rolling by asking, is there ever a right time for us to be having a GST hike? And, you know, are there any severe implications to the population or even to certain segments of the population if we have a GST hike this year?
Maybe I'll have a first go. Yeah, I mean, see, it's before you have a tax hike, I mean, it would be good to know why we are raising taxes, right? I mean, so obviously there's a sense that there is going to be a shortfall because expenditures are going to exceed revenues, right? But we have not seen till today a clear set of projections from the government. You know, what are the expected revenues based on the current scenario? And what are these growing, precisely in precise numbers, what are these growing demands? Yes, we know that we are an aging society. We have to look after the elder. We would expand, you know, healthcare and all that. We know that, but we don't know the numbers. So until you know, we need to know the gap. And once we know the gap, then we can decide, okay, what's the best way to fill that gap? And then we look at the various alternatives and then we decide. So right now we don't have the numbers. So it's very hard for us for anyone to rigorously say yes or no, right? That's one point. Second point, it's unique to the current times that we are facing, is that we are in a surprisingly inflationary period. After long years of very low inflation, where inflation really almost didn't matter, prices are clearly rising. You know, you go to the kopitiam, you're paying 10 cents more on the coffee, that kind of thing, right? $2 more on my haircut, by the way. So the risk here is that people are beginning to sense that prices are rising and expectations are rising. Now, inflation can be destabilized if people's expectations become self-fulfilling, right? So this is not the time, I feel, where you want to add some more things that could inflame these expectations. And definitely a GST hike of 2 percentage points would make people, people will feel it. And they would start expecting prices to rise. So they would start expecting or demanding higher wages. A lot of companies will say, well, okay, this is a great opportunity for us to jack up prices that we were hoping to do anyway. And these things can feed on themselves, you know. So I just feel that, you know, I mean, to be fair to government, of course, nobody really, none of us economists got this right about how bad the inflation situation was going to be, but it is pretty poor. And it is unstable right now, and we've got to be very cool, very careful about not feeding that that inflationary spiral. So I'll stop there.
My take on it is whether you have got with all these years of increasing various forms of taxes, increasing revenue to the government, on the cost front, what have we done about managing government civil service costs? Expenses such as Jewel at Changi, wrong timing, too big, no justification. The Minister for Transport has not asked for that $500 million to be spent, and then he spends it. So what sort of costs are we dealing with for the next 10 years, next 20 years? And then just because of this boogeyman called climate change, we are talking about a seawall that would cost $100 billion. Show me the evidence. Let's use science and show me the evidence, and then show me the projections, why we need to build it, why we need to spend the money now. For example, Terminal 5. Do you really need Terminal 5? Why did you spend it ahead of time? What exactly are you spending for? We've got another new train line that we have already started spending money on. Is there really a demand for that new train line? Because as far as I heard from various ministers, there isn't a population target, there isn't a population growth drive, and therefore then why do we keep building and building, and why do we keep reclaiming land? So I want to see on the cost front how money is going to be spent. Then given the last 10 years, additional gaming revenue, additional tax on alcohol, tobacco, additional tax on carbon, with all these additional taxes, then why did we still need to consider additional GST?
Okay, so I personally, I feel that no one ever wants to pay more tax, and therefore there's never a really good time to raise taxes. But I understand that there is a shortfall, and yes, you know, so for public administration, there are a lot of costs there. Somehow the expenditure is just not, it's just over what we are collecting right now. So I also hear that, yes, you know, medical costs, they've tripled, you know, in like the past, like when you look at the past decades. So I can see that there are reasons for that. And climate change, I mean, the 100 billion projection is very high, but of course, currently we don't know what that entails. So building the polders and other things, I mean, currently we've already built a lot of seawalls, and we're still in the process of you know, more coastal protection. I mean, this is very necessary because we are a low-lying country, and this needs to be addressed. But of course, we need to see, I mean, how, over what time period and what projects will this $100 billion be spent on. Also, of course, with carbon tax and stuff like that, we are getting some revenue. But I guess we'll discuss that a little bit later. So I feel that for GST to go up to 9%, it is very high, and I'm not looking forward to it. I did hear from a friend, though he feels like now is the best time to do it. Only he said that, but like, all my other friends are kind of dreading it. And I have a friend who also said that he recently got married, he's got his BTO coming up, and the renovation is going to cost a lot of money, bearing in mind these types of things. So for a lot of people, it's just going to hit us hard, for things that we are already expecting to pay for. So I think, we collect revenue in many different ways, but of course, it's good to know how much they're going to collect, how much they're looking at collecting, and for what purposes.
On that point as well, we claim that we have spent a lot, that expenses are high, that healthcare costs are going up a lot, but that's a natural state of the evolution of the demographics, right? There are more and more old people now.
Yeah.
And what is the best tool, for example, for dealing with cost increases? Increase the supply. When demand is high, increase the supply. If your supply way exceeds demand, costs will go down, right? So why don't we build 10 more hospitals? Why don't we train another few thousand doctors and nurses? And once we have oversupplied our own needs, doctors and nurses could be exported, such that we are providing foreign talent to many other countries who want our talents, right? We have done that 20 years ago. Our project managers, our auditors, our accountants were well loved by the Middle East, by Chinese corporates who want to use our talent to upgrade their corporates. Let's do that again. So to say that costs are going up, but then not putting money where our mouth is very odd. The other question that I have is, did we really spend 50 over billion from the reserves due to this pandemic? Because as far as I know, I'm an SME. I run an SME. I tried to get onto the loan schemes. The loan schemes that is backed up by the special budget is merely a budget that is set aside to guarantee the bank's bank loans. Many of the SMEs who have tapped into these programs, as the last count I saw from a July statement from the Minister for Finance, was that 22 billion or so of money have been used to support SME on their SME loans. Most of these SMEs today are alive and have started to pay back the loan. So the money is set aside as a guarantee. It is not money that is spent such that it's given away for other purposes. So let's look at the scorecard of whether we've really used up the reserves or not. Of course, money that went into job support scheme, they would have been spent. But then having the job support scheme puts money into the hands of the consumers, who then reuse it, and is paying GST back on the money that was given out to them as job support. So let's really look at the scorecard and be honest with ourselves. Did we really use up that much money, and do we really need such a large budget?
I agree with that. And that's kind of the narrative that I feel the government has been building over the last couple of years. So they keep saying, if we take out from the reserves, then we must make sure that we put back to some degree. And this is where now our chickens are coming home to roost, in the sense that now Singaporeans all have to pay back in the form of this 9% GST hike. But I think, that there have been a couple of things, and this is something that, not just yourself, but Olivia also brought up when we talk about these other ways of funding that spending shortfall, or other ways of generating additional taxes beyond just consumer tax. So, for example, if we're looking at, raising carbon taxes, will that really help to, make a dent and, help us to really rebuild that piggy bank? Or, are we looking at perhaps increasing wealth taxes? I think, we read an article in CNA today that, or was it the day before, that said that, if you were to squeeze that golden goose too hard, it might fly away. And I find that metaphor so interesting because, do the wealthy really feel that way? Is there really going to be that kind of capital drain that we're looking at? And I thought,
yeah.
Manu, your perspective would be so much welcome
Nicole,
on this.
Nicole, I think you raised a very important point, and that is this whole issue of savings, government savings. And, there's always an optimal level. You never maximize something, whether it's a good thing like savings or not, there's always an optimal level, because if you save too much, there's a trade-off, right? There's a cost to it. If you save too much right now, that means you're starving the current generation of things that they could benefit from, like Swee Yong pointed out. So we have this very, very conservative approach to savings. It's almost like we cannot save enough. But I think it's time that we had a proper open discussion on what are we saving for and what is that optimal level of saving, right? If it is for the future aging and climate change, then let us quantify that and put aside some money for that. If it is for an emergency, like perhaps a war or something, let us quantify. Okay, roughly how much would you need? Put aside the money for that. And then we decide what is the optimal level. So it may well be, for instance, because we don't know the numbers, but it may well be that we are well above the optimal level, that we've already exceeded it, in which case, even if we draw down the savings, why do we need to rebuild it if we're already above that level? So until we have the information, we can't have a proper discussion. We can't decide. And I find that very frustrating, because this is a very important question for all Singaporeans. What is the optimal level of savings? Do we already have too much? Do we have too little? Let's discuss it. Let's understand the issues, and we should understand. Second point, if I could just add, alternative ways of dealing with things such as healthcare costs. Now, healthcare costs are rising. We need to understand why, right? Now, part of that could be that perhaps we're not regulating the healthcare sector rigorously enough. I mean, why is it, pharmaceutical prices are so much higher in Singapore than across the causeway? Across the causeway, literally, for some of the medication I use, it's 1/3 the price. Why should there be such a big difference, right? And are there inefficiencies? Why is there such a big gap between the cost of doing something in the private hospital versus our public hospitals, which I have to say are extremely good, right? Why such a huge difference? And can we not regulate that? Because that feeds into the cost structure. Because ultimately, even if insurance pays for it, our insurance premiums will go up, and costs of living, business costs all go up as well. So this is, again, a very important issue. Are we regulating healthcare in the proper way?
Is there a possibility that we are also falling prey to big pharma? So sorry, Swee Yong, I'm just going to provide a very quick question on this, because I think, as we know, the cost of medication as well could be pegged to the GDP per capita for each country as well. And that's why you do tend to see that in developing economies, the price of medication is a lot cheaper compared to a more well-off economy like, say, Singapore or other countries, for example. So do you think this is something that we can afford to lobby a bit harder for, or do you think our hands are basically tied when it comes to this aspect of cost?
I mean, to be fair, it's a global issue, right? But that doesn't mean that we cannot do more. I do believe we can do more. Because the price difference, 3 times the price is, sorry, a bit excessive. If it's 40% more because we are richer country, fine. But 3 times? No, something's wrong.
So to add on to that point, Manu asking for transparency, this debate and this discussion that we have, because the word GST affects us personally, so we have been talking about it based on personal income tax, personal expenses. What about the MNCs? So if the healthcare and the farmers want to charge us higher for medication because our GDP per capita is one of the highest in the world, what are the farmers paying here in terms of corporate income taxes? So, in fact, on one point which Louis and probably Leon has been on this topic recently, if you could be more transparent with me about what all the MNCs are getting in terms of tax incentives, in terms of their pioneer status, in terms of the grants that for every dollar they put here into research, maybe we are giving them some money back. Probably stopping 1 or 2 of these programs doesn't make us any less competitive as an economy, but would probably save quite a bit of expenses on the government budget or increase revenue. So I would like to know more numbers around what MNCs are really paying in terms of taxes as well.
Olivia, do you want to add on anything to what Swee Yong and Manu have already shared?
No, this is an area that I can't say I know too much about. Yeah.
Understand. Actually, I wanted to go back to what you shared about the $100 billion projection with regards to climate initiatives. You know, we always talk about putting a lot of money behind that, but I'm just wondering whether the KPIs are holistically formed. Like, do you think that, you know, for example, we've had a lot of talk about, you know, climate sustainability initiatives that we want to roll out to transform Singapore. But sometimes I wonder if the left hand is not talking to the right hand, for example. So, you know, even down to a very simple thing, like we are talking about maybe planting 1 million trees, but in the same breath, you see green lungs getting completely wiped out. You know, you see like big trees, big mature trees being uprooted on the highway and they're being replaced by little saplings. And I kind of feel that that really defeats the purpose of what we're looking for when we say we want to live in a green city where, you know, nature can really coexist with the people in that sense.
Yeah, so so for a lot of environmental activists, we kind of feel very sad about all these trees disappearing, and of course with Tengah being a humongous project, we kind of feel sad about that, and I would say yes, we are planting 1 million trees, but it's not quite the same, right? Because the biodiversity you build in a space over a period of time, I mean, this takes time to build, and to wipe it all out and then start afresh, that's challenging. So I also understand we have some housing needs. So yeah, that part is difficult to kind of I guess understand. And of course, like for people like Nature Society, they put in, you know, their white paper documents, and they bring a lot of experts to give their recommendations, and they try and save whatever they can. On the green front, I mean, Singapore is quite a unique place, right? We are such a built-up city, and we have no hinterland, and our green spaces keep disappearing. But in return, the government has said that they will give us more nature parks as well, so 50% more by 2030, and they have, you know, the green plan and things like that. So we will all have access to a park, things like that, but it's not quite the same as a forested area. Of course, we also have to care for our wild, you know, creature friends. So we have to make sure that when they try to, for example, travel, you know, within, you know, between different green spaces, that they have ways of doing that without, you know, crossing roads. So that, I mean, we have to basically protect them. And with the cross island line that's coming up, you know, there's been quite a big hoo-ha about how there's going to be work tunneling under the nature reserve. So I mean, there's just I guess for a lot of environmental activists, we kind of also wonder, you know, like, is there a need to have so many MRT stations? But at the same time, I know that our friends in Jurong also they don't want to sit on the train for that long as well. So it's really hard to balance everyone's interests. And on the green front, actually, there are a lot of other things, right? So as a city, we do try to do a lot of other environmental, we have a lot of environmental initiatives as well. So I would say that we try and cut carbon emissions in many different places. And Singapore has to look at energy efficiency. We have a lot of buildings, and currently we're still on that road to greening 80% of buildings in Singapore. So yeah, I would say if you ask, you know, environmental activists, like, is the government doing enough? They'll always say no. Yeah. So
really, these are small little action items that we are taking to improve very small incremental aspects of the built environment. There are broader laws that we can enact. For example, we have got a lot of construction waste that's because we are all happy to make $1 million from the next en bloc deal, right? Or somebody might be buying a 40-year-old HDB because he thinks that this location has a great chance to be served. But in an en bloc, you're tearing down a lot of the concrete and then you're disposing them. And because of these very relatively generous en bloc rules, we are en blocking buildings at about 20-25 years age. And therefore, it created the other problem where you don't really have to build a building that would last for 100 or 200 years, not like what our great-grandfathers have done. You would just build a building to be sort of disposable after 25 years because somebody wants to make money from the en bloc anyway. And so poor quality construction then might start to come in, and therefore generating even more waste from maintenance and renovation. And on the one hand, we have got the built environment people, the designers and the developers who are trying to say that, oh, we have got our sustainability officers pushing for us to be more green, and building and construction authority having a scorecard to check on us on our green mark and our environmental friendliness. But then we allow developers to build up temporary show flats, and within a year, when the project of 600 units is fully sold, that temporary show flat is then completely dismantled, and again, construction waste coming out. So there are much broader laws that we can actually look at in detail to actually make Singapore a lot more green. And rather than all these little bits of, oh, can you plant a creeper on the wall so that your wall doesn't absorb that much heat from the sunlight?
Actually, one thing that really bothers me is with a lot of condos, they've built it such that you have a dryer because they don't want to, destroy the view, right? Like, or the facade of the condo. So people are not allowed to hang their laundry, for example, right, in certain areas. So because you are forcing people to use dryers, right? So in a hot country, which is outrageous, you basically have, you add to that all those carbon emissions, and energy usage. Yeah, but I mean, on the note about construction waste, actually that a lot of it gets recycled, but that's beside the point, there's really a very high turnover of these buildings, which is very unfortunate. Yeah.
Do you think there is a lot of wastage in general? We don't, it's not just specific to food, but even with regards to what Swee Yong shared earlier about, the buildings and a lot of the construction that's going on, and that turnover of properties seeming fairly high?
Yeah, there is a lot of waste. I mean, even like for my boyfriend who had a renovation, to his flat 2.5 years ago. I just basically I look at the waste, it's like, wow, it's so much, right? And I think even like you just look at spring cleaning, around Chinese New Year, you see so much waste already, and that's just a fraction. But there's a lot of waste. Food waste is horrific, and we are not really recycling a lot of it. But now, I mean, there are projects, where we are so. I would say that that's quite promising. So all these food digesters, for example, which can then, you can extract biogas from that. And so that there is a project at the moment. I can't remember where it is, but it is basically they have it on site, and then they extract the biogas, and that actually powers certain facilities within the hawker center itself. So that's really cool. But of course, food segregation is difficult. I mean, you think about, so a lot of the stallholders and the cleaners have to do that right now. And in future, you never know, maybe you might need patrons to do that. I mean, for now, tray return is really so hard. Yeah, so food segregation, basically, if we can get more of these hawker centers to do that. Actually, we have aerobic digesters in some of these hawker centers itself. Our Tampines Hub has one. So that one, we just kind of extract, we basically break it down into, I think, some non-potable water and some what they consider to be compost. Yeah, but we can do a lot more of that lah. But food waste is horrible. So there are a lot of families who do need food in Singapore. A lot of that gets thrown away by, food establishments. We need the Good Samaritan law to come into effect so that people can give away food. All these restaurants can give away food without worrying, that there'll be any kind of legal dispute following that if anything goes bad. But in Singapore, there are a lot of ways that people can get hold of free food. There are apps for that. There's Olio. Also, there's Food Rescue in Sengkang. And there are people who also just give away food. Like there's Kampong Bishan. If you get on the Facebook page, there's a lot of info there as well. So there's they have an initiative called Mobile KB, and then they just go around the island and they just give away food. Yeah, so a lot of food in Pasir Panjang wholesale market gets thrown out, and a lot of supermarkets, different places. So people need to find out, how to get onto that.
The one thing that I'm hearing about all these initiatives is that the dealing with climate change and trying to build a country that, is suited to deal with the challenges that climate change brings seems to be a really expensive affair, because you're not just talking about these bottom-up initiatives, like, trying to curb that food wastage cycle. You're not just talking about, putting a dryer in a condo. You're not just talking about building a vine on a wall, but it just seems like even with regards to, say, electric vehicles, for example, do we have enough charging points around the island? Are we going to kind of fit these into public properties so that, people will be more incentivized to buy an electric vehicle? So things like that. So I think what we are starting to see is that the move towards climate change seems to be a necessary one. It seems to be a global emergency. But at the same time, it's just so expensive, and it doesn't seem to have that sort of immediacy that, for example, the COVID pandemic has. So I thought it'd be a good time for us to then kind of maybe segue into talking about the reserves. And, when do we start to activate the reserves? When do we start to determine that, okay, this is enough of a crisis, this is enough of an emergency, such that, we will need to spend this sum of money, regardless of whether we have generated that revenue in the short term. So maybe Manu, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, with regards to the reserves, and, are we spending too little? Are we too conservative? Can we afford to go a bit harder? Are we falling prey to certain narratives of being spendthrift?
Yeah. Just for clarity, if you're talking about climate change, what I think is that the world is not going to get its act together. And we as a small country will just have to accept that. That means the damage from climate change to us is going to be quite sharp. It is not, first of all, it is rising sea levels. Secondly, it is on average significantly higher temperatures. And thirdly, it's much greater variation in weather patterns, which can be very damaging, sharp floods followed by droughts and that kind of thing. And National Climate Change Secretariat actually has done very good work on identifying these things. Now, I think we just have to assume that we will have to deal with this and assume a pessimistic scenario, which means that the amount of money we spend is not just on seawalls for rising sea levels. It is also, how do you make this country, the city, still a livable and competitive city with respect to its competitors, even as temperatures soar and all that, right? Now, what we don't want is to be Abu Dhabi without the oil, right? I mean, it's just basically unlivable, right? So, we need to think about very innovative ways. We have to devise our own solutions, frankly, to make our urban spaces much more livable when the outside temperature could be extremely high and extremely variable as well. And that means investment in R&D as well as in physical infrastructure. I'm sure Swee Yong can say more about this, but I think it's going to be very expensive. And sorry, this is a case where you have no choice. It's existential. It's not a question of whether you want to do it or not. You will have to do it. You will have to put aside money, right, for that. That's how I look at it.
But in terms of the kind of investment that we are looking at, do you foresee that, it might potentially really eat into the reserves in a way that is just simply untenable for people, or even untenable for the government, for example?
we don't have the numbers, right? So very hard to say, right? But on my estimate, actually, we have a very, very substantial reserve, and it is much larger than any other country on earth, right? So if we can't do it, then nobody else can, frankly. Yeah. But I'm not a climate change specialist, so I don't know how to cost the various remedial measures that we have to take and how that will be spread over many years. So like 100 billion is not 1 year, right? It's over decades. So per year, it's actually not a huge sum of money, right? But we really do need to see some proper projections from government so that we as a nation and as a society can discuss this and can come to a consensus view. It's a very important issue.
And in your view, and I'm not just saying this with regards to building that climate, that economy that's ready for climate change and to make Singapore into a more livable space, but also with regards to dealing with the COVID pandemic, do you think that the government has been spending aggressively, conservatively? Can we afford to spend more and perhaps, just reduce the growth of that reserves year on year, or, are we being too prudent about this right now?
Again, without the numbers, you cannot be absolutely sure, right? But as an economist, right, look at the reserves. Okay, what contributes to the reserves, right? It's the budget surpluses, and it's also the the growth in our external reserves, right? That's separate from the government reserves. So if we have an external surplus, right, we have a huge current account surplus. It's like double-digit percentage of GDP, biggest in the world, right? So we are constantly accumulating foreign exchange reserves, which eventually MAS then hands over to GIC to manage. So most economists would agree that we are going to continue to have such large surpluses over time. And so, even forget the budget surplus, the surplus from the external reserves is going to grow, and that's going to yield income as well, right? So, just on the ballpark figures and all, it looks like there will be a considerable growth in the reserves and the income from those reserves, right? I mean, it seems to me to be the case. Yeah. I personally suspect, and I cannot be sure until I see the numbers, but I personally suspect that we can increase spending on social safety nets, for instance, substantially without incurring any damage to our fiscal position. But that's just my suspicion.
Okay, thank you so much, Manu. Sorry if I put you in a spot earlier. I'm aware that these are very theoretical questions with no practical answers at this point in time, but thank you very much for taking a stab at them. Okay, I think, we're keeping really good time. Perhaps it's now a good time for us to move on into talking about manpower and wages. So maybe we can start by discussing, how manpower has been affected because of the COVID pandemic. What kind of observations have you all made in the past 2 years that have been slightly different? Perhaps with regards to certain sectors or even with regards to the gig economy, for example.
I think that if you want to deal with this topic on manpower, you really have to go down to the basics of how we educate our children for the next 30 years. And let's start with even at the nursery level, how do we educate children? Because the volatility and the flux is just going to become much faster. You could have lived on a Casio calculator for 20 years in school at that time, but today, no, man, you have to learn how to use an Excel spreadsheet, right? So we need to start with education. And the previous almost 20 years since Minister Raymond Lim's restructuring of the economy at that time after we had SARS, and then we welcomed a lot of foreign talent to Singapore. We opened up the finance services sector, infocom, media. We started investing into intellectual property. We have used well-paying, high-value foreign talent to supplement our population, and they like Singapore. They move here with their family. They establish roots. Some of them become Singaporeans. But today, we have got a different set of technology, for example, Zoom, that will allow people to still contribute to our economy, but without really having to come here. And so projecting on population growth by bringing in industries to invest here, we can still be bringing in billions and billions of dollars in pharmaceuticals investments, data centers, and high tech. And the number of people working for these new investments would be very little, very few. So EDB's annual target of about 10, 12 billion foreign direct investments, I believe they can still hit these targets because high tech and high value businesses, investment sizes in quantum for each deal is getting bigger and bigger, and we can attract them. But in terms of the numbers of jobs available, and then do we have the relevant manpower workforce that can fill these very high tech jobs? I think we have to relook at the whole thing in totality now, starting from education.
Do you think we are at present facing a glut of perhaps overqualified talents that are coming out as fresh grads? Or do you think that right now, based on the kind of direction that we are moving towards, are there any structural employment gaps that you might see?
I
overall
get conflicting data from, well, maybe it's because mainstream media is giving me the conflicting data. On the one hand, when we were headhunting for certain positions, and then the conclusion is that, for this CEO's position, we have gone around the world searching, and we could only find him in a Singaporean and probably ex-military or ex-civil service, right? And so apparently Singapore has got a lot of talent, but on another hand, I keep seeing articles saying that, hey, Singapore is short of talent, we need to import more. And at the same time, our universities are being ranked in the top, 50 positions in the world. And so if our universities are so highly ranked, how come we are saying that we do not have sufficient talent? And then we've got a Singaporean unemployment rate of about 4% that is still going on today. Our Singaporean unemployment rate should be negative 2% because many of us should be holding on to 2 or 3 jobs, given that it is the gig economy now, right? Some data scientists are actually holding on to 2 or 3 consulting jobs at the same time. So I find all these data a little bit conflicting, which is why I say, let's relook at this whole idea about talent and manpower.
So the problem right now is that we have that 4% number that you're talking about, but anecdotally, we also hear that there are a lot of lower income folks who are out of a job. You know, for example, when I do my house visits, when I speak to residents, we do hear of people who say that, work has been really tough because of COVID. It's been very slow. There aren't enough slots to go around. There aren't enough shifts to go around. Is there anything that we can potentially do to help support this group better, especially with the upcoming budget? Do you think cash handouts are enough, or do you think that there are more things that we can put in place? Maybe Manu, I noticed you unmuted. So
this is I think it's a very important topic. In fact, right now, of course, segments of the population have been hit hard because of COVID, because COVID, destroyed tourism, and anything related to tourism, F&B is down. These are labor-intensive sectors where the lower income, less skilled people found a niche, and they had hopefully a decent living. And now that's been taken care. So that's a problem, but I believe that problem will be addressed as we come out of the COVID pandemic and we move on with life. I really believe that things are going to be much better than people think. However, the real problem is the structural challenge from the kind of economic restructuring, and most importantly, from technological change. Technological change is going to really cause extreme dislocation in the labor market. A lot of jobs are going to go. A lot of jobs will be created, but a lot of jobs will also go. And that being the case, we have to get ready. Now, some people, typically the younger ones, can easily be retrained. But the older you are, realistically, it is very difficult to retrain an older person who's been used to certain ways of doing things and has a certain educational foundation into something that fits in with the new tech economy. And the point I'm coming to is that we will have no choice but to expand social safety nets, because there will be a segment of the population that we just have to look after. And as a decent economic, as a decent society, we must look after those people. We cannot just throw them and make them cardboard collectors or whatever. No, that group of older folks who need social safety nets is going to grow significantly over the next 10 years, and we must be prepared for that. And if it means, a state-funded pension, so be it, because I don't think CPF is anywhere near enough to fund the retirement needs of our people. And we need to think hard about this.
That's why we will raise GST. And it might not even be at 9%. I was thinking that perhaps Finance Minister next week might say, actually, there's a longer term GST number that is probably, say, 20%, but 9% in 2022, maybe 11% in 2025, and then it staggers up to 20%. But so I'm calling for let's have a little bit more numbers about what the multinationals are paying and the large corporates, because let's have a share in this. The other thing that might cause a little bit of hype in the market might be, I would expect that people in my industry, property agents, would be saying, hey, with GST increase, construction costs are going to increase, so the cost of housing, developers would have to pass on this additional cost to you, so the housing prices will have to go up. So please buy your apartments yesterday or buy your apartments now. So we have to watch how these cost increases, not just the 2% GST, we have to see how they would actually percolate through the system and the secondary and tertiary effects of this 2% increase, how it would actually push inflation up by more than just 2%.
Thanks so much, Swee Yong. So, we keep talking about things like the GST hike, how that's going to contribute to the rising of secondary costs. We talk about tourism impact, how that has resulted in, much lower footfalls, business revenues getting hit. We talk about COVID and how this stop, of all the government policies have resulted in people just simply not having enough jobs or enough shifts to go around. So do you think that at present we are doing more, or we are doing enough for the lower income to middle income Singaporeans? Or is there really, there's so much more that we can do? What do you all think?
Can I just say a few things? I think we are not doing enough. Yep. One, we don't have any kind of unemployment support schemes in this country. Not one, right? And okay, there's some small schemes that came with the COVID thing, but they are temporary and not universal. So we need to do that, because we're going to go into a period where, as I said, labor market will be dislocated. A lot of people will go through periods where they may not have jobs or income opportunities. So we must deal with that. Second thing is retirement adequacy. I think we are better off than many other countries. We have a CPF that's very well run and all that, but I don't think it is sufficient to cater for the overall needs of the people. So we need to look at that. Third area we need to look at is in terms of healthcare. I think, the last 9-10 years, I think we've done very well, actually. We've really beefed up the hospitalization side, but there are other elements of healthcare which have not been fully addressed, and we need to look at those gaps, but like elder care, for instance, and try and plug those as well. So there are many areas that are in crying need of additional spending.
I would add that we should spend more to support the social services workers, and maybe extend to the people who are getting a meager salary from working with NGOs, perhaps, because by subsidizing, or by actually, let's say, paying for 50% of their salaries, we could encourage more of these social welfare organizations to employ more people, and also bump up the salary a bit, so that it doesn't look too much of a sacrifice for example, a well-paid accountant or banker trying to get into social welfare type of work. And that has already been proven, that method has already been proven to work. For example, a decade ago, when we realized that we don't have enough nurses, and then we then advertise strongly, provided the courses for them to take on a subsidized basis, and then bump up salaries. And then for example, childcare teachers, we used to have a shortage of them, but with incentive schemes supporting their growth and their learning, as well as on the wage side, then we have alleviated the issue of not having enough childcare teachers. So the same could be made for social welfare workers as well. Bump up their salaries so that there'll be more arms and legs coming into the sector to help the families that need help.
These are all really good points. So I'm just going to take the healthcare point that has been brought up by Manu and the social welfare workers' income that has been brought up by Swee Yong, and just going to kind of segue into talking about COVID now and generally the government's handling of the COVID pandemic. I think to be fair and not here to be oppositional, but I think there's really no easy answers. We've seen for ourselves over the past 2 years how unpredictable this virus has been year on year, and it's almost as if we're living in Groundhog Day, where every year we are just going through the same thing and we never seem to get out of it. So it's a very difficult position that we are all in, and I think we recognize that the government is really trying their best. At the same time, I do also wonder if there was any possibility that some of the issues that we are facing right now could also have been nipped in the bud with a bit of forward planning. And that's why I want to bring in, the idea of not just social welfare workers, but even nurses not being fairly compensated. Some of the gaps in the healthcare system. Let's talk about it right now. What should we have done better so that we don't have to be in this position where we are constantly at risk of being locked down or of going back into lockdown because of the potential pressure and the bottleneck that it might put on our healthcare services. Manu, you want to?
Just a quick point. I think one lesson from the pandemic is that we need to build a lot more buffers in our health system. Yep. In the past, we sort of built just enough, right? Based on projections and all that. No. In the future, because there will be other unexpected and unquantifiable shocks, we'll just have to build in a lot more into the system. Secondly is, of course, the resilience of the system. Remember, we had a problem with face masks and availability of those things. And some of these things maybe, even if it's costlier, we may just learn to produce it domestically rather than depend on foreigners. So I think we need to rethink some of the ways we do things here.
I think the response time was pretty good, like with what the government did. Sure, there were some things that could have been done better, but yes, the reaction, this fast reaction was good. But of course, certain things, could have been prepared. And I mean, I have a friend who's a nurse, and I see like her updates about nurses and how they're burnt out, for example, and trying to get leave has been so difficult. And we've also seen like how their mental health has been affected. So I feel that this was a very strong test to our healthcare sector and how things need to be improved. So some things are hard to foresee, I guess. But it's good that now we know, and then we can do better next time.
Yes, so on those items which are reactive because it just hit us, or because, hey, Delta or Omicron caught us by surprise, MOH and the entire task force they have done a good job to help buffer Singapore against more losses, or more painful lessons, right? But I want to go back to the point that we should actually still, given that this is a pandemic and this is a virus, we should still try to go back to science. In our parliament, there are about a dozen medically qualified doctors, but yet the task force is led by no doctor, which means that this whole reaction is led by political considerations rather than led by science and medical and public health considerations, which to me is sort of odd. And it was disappointing for me to see there were doctors getting censured for earlier days, advising people to wear masks, and then more recently about being more cautious about vaccinating children. So are we really practicing science, because when you go into master's and PhD research programs, there's this thing called ethics review board, right? And we have got to follow strictly ethics principles. And if there is a hiccup during an experiment and the mRNA drugs are still classified as experimental drugs, we must review it completely before we keep on pushing ahead for more and more of these measures. And then the long-term side effects. Can we start to gather numbers, especially the aggravated mental health issues? Have we started also to track what is the number of excess deaths due to the last 2 years virus hitting us? I would like to know more, especially when the ministers start to review what has been done in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think these are all really, really good points. Definitely, I think there's a lot more that we can do. You're right to say that, there will be several instances throughout all of this where, and we've seen this with governments around the world, right, where they are forced to be very reactive simply due to the unpredictability of the virus and how it evolves. But at the same time, there are things that we could have done better. So I think the healthcare bottleneck is something that we spoke about, supporting the incomes of and even the mental health of nurses. I think that's something that's very important as well. And perhaps to a certain extent, not just the mental health of just nurses alone, but I think a lot of Singaporeans out there, this whole adjustment that we've had, being in a state of limbo, having to work on a hybrid model and a very inconsistent model of, working from home versus working in office. And, we've also heard horror stories of some Singaporean employees being subject to having to come back to office even when the numbers are high and even when they are very uncomfortable to do so. So I think it also calls into, greater questions around what do we define as productivity in this day and age, especially since things have changed so much for us. Yeah. So I think we've made really good points and we've covered a lot of ground in the past hour or so. We've spoken about, the GST hike, which is obviously the hot button topic that is on the minds of everyone and how it will impact us. We have also spoken about sustainability, stronger safety nets, manpower wages, as well as COVID pandemic policies and, what we could have potentially done better and what the government has done well, of course, to their due credit as well. So I think now it's a good time for us to go into the Q&A segment. So we will have a couple of questions that have already been picked out by Fik. So these questions are being taken from both the Zoom webinar internally as well as what's being live streamed on Facebook right now. So Fik, take it away. Do feel free to ask, and our panelists can then take it from there.
I actually just wanted to say that, I think one thing I actually gathered was that I think a lot of things we have difficulty moving forward with when it comes to policy crafting and all that, because we don't have enough data. It seems like it's a recurring issue, especially brought up by Swee Yong. So I mean, that's just something that I want to bring up. Yeah. Okay. So moving on to the questions. Okay. So one. We have received a lot. Yeah. So okay. So one thing I want to bring about, I think the aviation industry. There's I'm not so sure whether we briefly touched upon it just now. It was from Keegan Teo. Yeah. So as you all know, the aviation industry has been hard hit by COVID-19. And also, of course, we know that the government has been putting in quite a bit of effort in providing help towards this sector in past budgets. So, but of course, now that we know that it's slowly picking up, we are not so sure how much will be dedicated to that for this upcoming budget. But in the meanwhile, how do we go about to revive this domain? And also, there's another thing that was brought up was we may look towards the prospect of shifting our available resources for the transportation of vaccines to international allies, but this will not be a long-term solution. I'm not so sure whether this Keegan has actually made a reference to using our aviation resources to bring our vaccines to transport vaccines worldwide. I'm sure that there's actually a program going on, COVAX, right? Yeah.
So for aviation, we can be sure that it is dislocated. In future, aviation will be quite different. When COVID hit, Bill Gates himself told his team to hurry up and invest in Microsoft Teams, which is a competitor of Zoom. And today, one related sector to aviation, which is in tourism, is the MICE, meetings, incentives, conventions, exhibitions. How many conventions and exhibitions would you need to hold that is physical, where you would be welcoming 10,000 delegates to Singapore, when you've got this tool called Zoom, and there are many new tools now that allows for online exhibitions with virtual booths, as well as online seminars and you can attract even more participants from around the world. And participants in the wrong time zones can also then tune in a delayed telecast. And so meetings, conventions, those have changed. Business travel, if you were a chief financial officer of a large multinational, you would be thinking, my business travel budget would be cut down by XYZ%, and you would be making your shareholders very happy that you are cutting down on travel budget simply by expanding your subscription on Zoom, for example. So in future, travel will definitely lose a lot of the business component. But business component doesn't mean it is in business class or first class. It also will hit the economy class. And the aviation industry itself is finding other challenges, given the fact that today we are a lot more aware about ESG, and whether their fuel burn on jet fuel should be now quickly get converted into either hydrogen power or battery electricity, lithium battery power, right? So in these areas of industry, what is MTI doing to get Singapore a tiny niche foothold into either hydrogen battery power or lithium battery power, or perhaps the recycling of lithium batteries? So I think that there is new economic opportunities that we can pursue that can cover a little bit of the economic losses caused by a shrinking aviation aerospace market. But we need to chase them.
As part of the Singapore Green Plan 2030, hydrogen fuel cell is one of the alternative fuel sources they're looking at. Yeah, so that's something to note.
Okay. Yeah, that's one thing we have to see how it goes when we actually reach see how it goes over the next few years to see how it will come into fruition. Okay, so moving on, I think one question. Another question would be when expenses increase, okay, this is from the business point of view. In this case, the business would be in the context of a chicken rice store owner. Yeah, so when expenses increase, naturally, your employee also will be expected to have salary increases, and the employer will have to increase the price of the service or the product to cope with the higher expected salary. I mean, salary is just one thing. It's your product cost, your rental, and all that. And it seems like this person sees it as an endless cycle. Yeah. So he has highlighted that two main costs for businesses is high rental, high COE. I mean, from transportation of goods and raw ingredients. And now he's mentioning that there's going to be an increase in GST. So it seems like a never-ending situation when it comes to price increases. So are there any thoughts on that, be it from Manu, for example?
Yeah, happy to take that. I think there are two elements to this question. There's one is a cyclical, short-term thing about inflation, and the other is the structural level of our business costs. I think the first, inflation, I think Monetary Authority of Singapore is responsible for managing inflation. they have actually been far-sighted. They moved ahead of time compared to other central banks. And I'm quite confident that over the next year or so, you will see our inflation, our inflation will be much lower than other countries. Inflation will still be a bit high because global inflation is rising. There's nothing we can do about that. But because of timely action by MAS, which has been, I think, very good at managing this thing, inflation will generally come down by the end of this year. However, there's a bigger question embedded in this, and that's the structure of our business costs. There is something wrong with the structure of our business costs. It is exactly what the questioner said, rentals. There's some distortion in the system that keeps pushing up our business costs. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with property prices and how they feed through to the cost structure. It's not just rentals. If property prices are high, then our citizens will demand higher salaries in order to be able to live in the kind of property that they aspire to. So salaries will go up as well. So this property thing, I think Swee Yong probably can say a lot more about this, is insidious. And we need to think very hard about how we have let our property prices go up too high. We need to do something about that.
Just before starting this afternoon's discussion, I was just wondering what my landlord is going to do with revising the bill once GST increase happens, and then looking forward to the next 2 years of my tenancy agreement. How much more work do I have to take on to just cover the few $1,000s of increase on the office rental for up till the end of the tenancy agreement? I'm just getting a very small office in a co-working space, but still that 2% extra on my monthly rental multiplied by the next 24 months is not small money. And so I would have to try to recover that somehow by working harder or by charging more. So, yeah. And then there's the water bill, then there's the rest of the maintenance at ancillary bills. Most things have GST on them.
And then, when it comes to the consumer, at least from my perspective and many others, you can see that more and more malls are, I think in each mall, the percentage of unoccupied space, shop spaces have increased. I think pretty much I think the perfect example of that would be, I don't know when was the last time you all been to the Cathay at Dhoby. Yeah, I mean, you can see how bad the situation is. I think the Cathay would be pretty much the worst example of that. Yeah.
The landlords can come together and lower rentals for all of us to offset the GST and water bill increase and electricity bill increase. I'm hoping to see that.
Okay. Moving on to the next question. When it comes to aging society, as we know, because of that, we expect that healthcare expenditure is going to go up. Do you have any thoughts on investing more resources and political will into prevention when it comes to disease prevention on our end to support our people to live healthier lives and thus need less treatment later in life? Yeah. I think this was just a thought brought up by
I would say
viewers. Yeah.
We need both. So first, let's keep ourselves more healthy. It's the same. We know that there's been too much consumption of fast fashion, that we are throwing away too many T-shirts and sports shoes, and then this pandemic made everybody buy tights for their gym and for their exercises, right? And so the solution to that is to encourage less consumption. Similarly, if we want to lower healthcare costs, we should encourage people to be all healthier. Don't encourage them to consume too much food. Stop eating once you feel full. Don't overindulge. And that healthier lifestyle should, in fact, then reduce the burden on healthcare system. But we should expect more pandemics in future. And therefore, we should still overbuild capacity in healthcare software as well as healthcare hardware. Look at how we scrambled to build the tentages in near to the Keppel port, the
Tanjong Pagar, yeah.
Tanjong Pagar port, yes. We obviously didn't provide for an emergency like that. So we should still build the capacity to provide for such emergencies in future. In fact, this type of emergencies might not even be once in 20 years. It might be once every 10 years in future. So we need to do both. And the healthcare resources in terms of manpower in allied healthcare, as well as the doctors and nurses in hospitals, and we need to build that manpower resource a lot more.
Yeah, I agree. We need to have more emphasis on the health of people, mental health as well. So I mean, what this pandemic did show us was that there are a lot of people with underlying health conditions, and as we all age, we kind of need to take better care of ourselves as well. And I mean, sometimes we're so busy, right, with work, and we neglect certain areas, and we have so many responsibilities and things like that. But I think that there must be a greater push by the government as well on basically exercise, and also eating less of. I mean, I think they did a good job with the sugar thing, because they were kind of like pushing out that message about having less sugary drinks. And years ago we had PM Lee talk about diabetes, and of course a lot of people kind of said, what, diabetes, why are you raising this issue? But then now we can see that actually there are a lot of people with diabetes. A lot of my friends have diabetes. A lot of people I know have diabetes. I mean, and it's quite a huge problem, I think, that we need to look into. Some of it's hereditary, of course, and some of it is not. It's due to their work and lifestyles and things like that. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. So we are pretty much 6 minutes away from 4:30. Understand that Manu will have to move to his next appointment. So perhaps I think we can proceed with some closing remarks, starting with Manu. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this is going to be a very important budget. We're coming out of the COVID thing, but we really need to focus now on the post-pandemic period. It's going to be a period of extraordinary change and a lot of challenges. So in addition to things like GST, I think it would be good if the budget statement also gave us some sense of direction on how the government looks at these structural challenges, how we're going to reformulate our economic model in order to address those changes. So I look forward to that, not just the carbon price and the property changes and GST. Thanks.
So Olivia.
Well, I look forward to the carbon the carbon price being announced, because it was announced that in the first year itself, more than 200 million was collected. So and of course carbon price is very low, it's only $5. So if they can raise it significantly, then we can have high revenue and hopefully get a lot of these polluters to kind of reduce their emissions as well. We need more pressure on that end. Hopefully, a lot of good news for parents, and the green sector.
I'm hoping that the revenue and tax income is only a small part of the discussion. Next week's budget, if the minister could reveal to us and explain to us how he might be controlling expenses, especially for the longer term as we pull out of the pandemic, where the priority spend should be, where there could be massive savings to be obtained, for example, from reduced government travel on business class, for example. That sort of would balance the picture, because we keep talking about one side of the balance sheet, or we keep talking about the revenue. We are not giving any attention to the costs. We need to look at the whole accounting statement from both sides.
All right. Yeah. Thanks everyone for your closing remarks. Nicole.
Yeah, thanks so much, Vic, for taking the questions and for sharing them with the panelists. So I think we've come to the end of our webinar. It has been a very fruitful discussion, and once again, I'm really, truly grateful for the three of you really joining us this afternoon, because it's very clear that all of you have different specializations, and you all have different bases as well from which you come from, and as a result of that, we're really bringing in different perspectives into this discussion, which I think it's very critical for budget 2022, and not just budget 2022, but even for other budgets as well, because in everything that we implement, we do need to consider, what kind of support we're giving, not just to a small group of Singaporeans, but really to the bulk of Singaporeans out there. So I think for me personally, the takeaway that I've gotten from this is that there is still, in spite of all of the bells and whistles, in spite of the big fancy KPIs that we have, at the heart of it, we still do need to care for the lower and middle income group of Singaporeans. I think these are the people who are still continue to be very much impacted and affected by this COVID pandemic and the kind of uncertainty that it has thrown them into. So personally, I really do hope to see sustained support, not just beyond short-term ang paos that we throw out every 2 or 3 months, but what kind of sustained structural support we can provide to them. I think this will really underscore whether the budget is successful at taking care of the bulk of Singaporeans. I think in the same breath as well, we also want to not just fix internally the gaps, but also to have a more longer term approach. And that's why we were talking about, and we made a couple of really good points in this webinar as well, as to how we can further future-proof Singapore society to make it a more livable place for us, especially in the midst of this existentialist crisis that's coming towards us. Yeah, so once again, really thank you so much for all of your time. I just want to give a huge shout out to the Youth Wing EXCO members and volunteers who have been helping us, in the back end as well. Fik, thank you for doing such a great job moderating. Thank you, Alan, who has been hiding behind that red square the entire webinar, but he's the one who really was the tech guy for all of this. And we also have the volunteers who have been, texting or WhatsApp, making sure, that the questions are sorted, and also really appreciate everyone's time, and most of all the participants. Thank you so much for coming by and spending your Saturday afternoon with us. And I hope you found it a very fruitful and fulfilling session. So we hope to do more of this in future. And in the meantime, please stay safe and please take care, everyone. And happy Valentine's Day.
Okay.
Take care.
Okay. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.